everyone. Welcome to the Courageous Survivor Breaking Chains. Today, we are going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, probably one of my favorite to train on, and it has been one of my favorite to kind of work on rewiring in myself, because as I look at society, I feel like this is an area where society is getting worse, losing control of it, and here I am getting better. And I literally just did a social media video talking about this and how different the world has changed in my lifetime, especially the last, I would say 3 to 4 years on people's responses. And that is talking about the emotional brain versus the rational brain. So kind of really looking at the rational brain, which is the kind of the prefrontal cortex area, and then the emotional brain, which is kind of our limbic system. So our amygdala, which is our kind of our alarm center, and our hippocampus, which is kind of like our filing cabinet, like our memory center. Because, and this is really important to me because trauma really has a huge impact on these two systems, like these two areas of the brain. And when you look at society today, so like last night was the debate, the presidential debate. And so this morning, I didn't watch it. I don't care. But you like trying to get on social media this morning to go and do anything, everything was like so extreme one way or the other. And so like I really talk about how in my lifetime, people used to be able to sit down and have intelligent, rational, fact-based, objective conversations. You could have difference of opinions and have discussions where people didn't raise their voice. People didn't, threaten things or quit or I truly fear. I guess I don't fear. I shouldn't use that word because I don't care about other people's opinions enough. I just don't discuss them. I am firm on where I stand in stuff, and I just don't discuss that with other people because it's not their business. But you can't have discussions with people. I don't want to discuss guns or who I vote for or trauma or you can't have rational conversations because people are so caught in their emotional responses, their feelings, and everything has this grandiose this over the top response. And I used to very much be like that. And that is when I was rooted in trauma. I had unpacked stuff. I had problems, being able to function because of these two systems being completely hijacked from trauma. And so we're going to first talk about the prefrontal cortex. So the role of that, the prefrontal cortex, which again is our rational brain, that is kind of like our decision-making center. So that's what helps regulate our emotions, control impulses, manage attention. So processing complex thoughts. So this is the essential part of our brain for planning, reasoning, and moderating social behaviors. So, when you need to be able to have those discussions and be able to sit down and objectively talk about them, that's this part of the brain. The part of reasoning, your social cues and your social behaviors, not just saying F you and walking off your job and just all of that stuff. So how it is impacted by trauma is that trauma can disrupt the development and the functioning of it. So it impairs the person's ability to make sound decisions. Let me tell you about some of the decisions that I was making back when my prefrontal cortex was completely hijacked by trauma. So, and like being able to rationally think in stressful situations. So in the midst of my trauma, like I made, you kind of get stuck and you don't be able to think out the consequences to your decisions. And so you just make impulsive decisions, which I did a lot of. So then when you have trauma, your prefrontal cortex becomes underactive. So then it makes it difficult to think clearly, to process information. So to process, like to be able to really truly think about things, to calm down after like stressful events. And again, this leads to impulsivity, hypervigilance, and difficulty managing stress. The problem with that is this can persist for years after trauma, and it's not going to fix itself. So when I would get myself in like overwhelmed by just decisions, by trauma, like I just packed up and moved. I packed up and moved to North Carolina from Ohio one time. I packed up and moved to, down into Louisiana. It didn't even think about the consequences of the decisions. Like I just wanted to escape everything here. I had problems managing money. I can't tell you how many times I one time got on the back of a motorcycle and took off with somebody who I didn't know. We were going well over 80, 90 mile an hour. Like it was horrible. And I'm like, oh. And I didn't think about the consequences that I had a small child or just all of that stuff. Just quitting jobs, getting mad and ruining friendships. And just so many things. I was one of those people who, was always on the attack. So when people would come at me, kind of calling out some of my behaviors, I would just bite back at them. And I didn't have the capability to be able to truly hear what they were saying. Like I was not listening with an open heart and an open mind. I was disassociating and just responding in a way that was often out of context. So that was really hard. Like again, that is where I have over the decades hurt other people in my pain, because I these systems were hijacked, and I've had to work really hard to be able to pause and really kind of process what I'm feeling and be able to think and respond out of a place of not my emotional brain, but from the rational brain. So think about the world today and the stuff that you see. Again, there was a video of a kid. He was a teenager who got like a Nintendo Switch or something taken away. It was viral, and he beat a teacher. You beat a teacher from having something taken away. That is the prime thing of this. Not being able to think about the consequences, it seeming so much bigger than it was, all of that. So now, when you talk about the limbic system, so this again is our hippocampus and our hippocampus and our amygdala, which are two of the main functions or two of the main parts. So it's kind of like our brain's emotional center. So it's responsible for regulating emotions, motivation, and memory. So I often tell people that when you have a bunch of trauma, like think of your hippocampus as a filing cabinet. And so the more trauma you are around, it's like taking a file folder out and just discarding it. You lose memories, you lose, your body's memory capabilities. It really impacts memory. And that's where you start getting holes in your memory and, you can't remember stuff. So, so there's that. And the key parts again are the amygdala, which is responsible for fear, and emotional responses in the hippocampus, which is the memory formation and retrieval. Like now that I'm like thinking fairly clearly, I have a lot of I struggle with being able to retrieve memories. Like it's very fragmented. There's some stuff that people will say and I'm like, I don't remember that at all. Um and that's part of living in the survival mode for so long that my memory, like I just don't remember so much. Like people like that I had relationships with or friendships with or coworkers that I worked with for a long time, like I just don't remember them. So the role of that, when you have trauma, the trauma causes the amygdala, so our alarm center, to become hyperactive. So that results in heightened fear response, emotional sensitivity, and an exaggerated startle reflex. So this makes individuals more prone to perceiving threats in the environment that aren't even threats. So that kind of puts you always on the offense. Like you were always in attack mode. That was me. That's a lot of people. Like as soon as you start saying, well, what do you mean? What are you saying about me? You hear all of that stuff all the time. So, and so then the hippocampus, which is crucial for distinguishing between past memories and present experiences. So this can shrink or at least become less effective due to trauma. So this is what, when you have trauma, it kind of causes difficulties and it blurs the lines in real danger and traumatic memories. So leading like flashbacks and triggers. It's interesting, I talk about my Bob Evans experience where I threw the food on the floor. That was very much a place of this. Like it was tied to an emotional memory, and that blurred lines between past traumatic experience and the present day experience got very blurred. And so stuck in my, trauma response and being able to come from the emotional brain instead of the rational brain, I exploded on her. And horrible. I wish I could go, I really wish I could find her, the younger waitress, and apologize to her. I've went back to the Bob Evans and tried to, but I mean, they're not going to remember. So, the limbic system becomes stuck in survival mode after trauma. So it really does make it harder to regulate emotions, which I think is why so many people respond from the emotional brain. why we're no longer really able to have rational discussions. It's all people responding from the emotional brain. I mean, think about how much trauma we are exposed to every day. Social media, people are really struggling with mental health. People are struggling to pay their bills. I know, like, I look at my grocery bills from what they are now from 2 or 3 years ago, like, my whole budget has changed. Everything has changed. The workforce is people aren't going to work like they used to. Everyone is short-staffed. I mean, just and not to mention what you see on the news, all the TV shows, like, everything has to do with shooting and there's so much, like, traumatic stuff that people see, and kids are exposed to this all the time. I mean, we sit on our phones and we scroll and scroll and scroll, and it's just bad stuff after bad stuff after bad stuff. I mean, people really aren't taking the time to sit down and regulate these systems. So that makes this so much harder for people to return to a state of calmness, kind of back to neutral after trauma, after stress. They're always living up here. And so, I prioritize self-care. I prioritize my quiet time. I'm home all day today. I have to work tonight. I will make sure that my TV is off. I will not be on social media. Like, I'm going to do stuff outside. I make sure I regularly have downtime. I try very hard to only maybe watch an hour or two of TV, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. I don't need that. I love reading. It's quiet, it's peaceful, and it's working the brain. Because you really have to work on that emotional regulation and just kind of calming that fight or flight. So when you have the prefrontal cortex and you have the limbic system, trauma causes an imbalance. So it can cause a disconnect between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. And so, it kind of messes up the logical thinking, emotional regulation, and makes it react emotionally to perceived threats. So, it just I think that if you step back and objectively look at people in your life and how many of them respond to things, and ask yourself, do you think that that's coming from facts or feelings? I mean, truly look at it. It's very apparent that a lot of people are stuck in fight or flight. So when you have these systems, and you start trying to be like, okay, I have experienced a lot of trauma. I really need to kind of work on rewiring these and calming, like, the limbic system and re-engaging that prefrontal cortex. So really working on those decision-making practices. It's really difficult because when we have this emotional versus rational brain imbalance, we see people who have overwhelming fear, anger, sadness, often without proportion to, like, what's going on in their life. And you go to the doctor because you're feeling this way, and they just tell you that you have mental health problems, and they give you a prescription for something when this is like a trauma response. You cannot medicate trauma out of you. So you can take Xanax, you can take whatever to kind of calm some of your symptoms, but what are you going to do? You are going to chronically need that. That will become a crutch for the rest of your life. Because as soon as you take off the med, it's still going to be in there. You have to unpack it. You have to do some you know, deep digging into what has happened, and you have to kind of really work through that and work on re-regulating those systems. So that happens. You have people who feel mentally frozen. So they are like truly they're kind of unable to solve simple problems. So things start looking overwhelming, like maybe with their budget, with um, you know, a marriage, a relationship, handling their child, just all of these things that seem overwhelming, and they can't sit down and kind of make out a plan how to kind of address those things. So you really just you'll see these people engage in impulsive behaviors, so risky behaviors, because they don't have that rational oversight. So and the people who are constantly scanning, looking for perceived threats. You see this a lot in military, police, fire, and EMS. Watch where they sit in, like when you go out to eat with them or something. Like they always got to be scanning. Like they want to sit with their back in a corner because they want to be able to constantly look. And well, if you're constantly scanning and being able to look for perceived threats, how present are you in with the family that you're dining with, or the friends or whatever? So that's kind of the thing. I have a lot of police, fire, EMS, military friends, and a lot of them, the majority of them, do that. So there's that. So okay, so you got all this, and you're like, and again, when it comes to unpacking trauma, like you are going to hear over and over and over again. I did a podcast about the happy, feel good hormones and about our stress hormones, like our stress chemicals. We're going to talk about the amygdala and hippocampus today. We're talking about those. We're going to be talking about different parts of trauma responses and what that looks like for trying to recover. And a lot of them are the same, because it's very frustrating, because it's stuff that we used to do a lot of, and we don't do stuff now. Like we as society are not very active. We don't go outside and put our feet on the ground. We're not out gardening like we used to. We're taking care of our lawn. We don't do a lot of physical exercise. It floors me that here in America, we have all these gym memberships, yet and people aren't going. And the people, we have a huge obesity problem. We have to really look at the cortisol and trauma and all that. Like that is in fact a big player into this, because a lot of people, again, are exposed to trauma. So when you are trying to work through this, and this has been some of the stuff that's been hard for me, and why I am so adamant about people prioritizing themselves, their self-care, their and they're working on their regulation, and kind of just really understanding that their whole body wellness is important. You can't pour from an empty cup, and people are trying to, and that is why we have such a horrible addiction, mental health, and suicide rate in our country. So mindfulness and meditation, over and over and over again, this comes back to a response. Taking CBT, so cognitive behavior therapy. So it kind of like that really works by helping individuals recognize kind of distorted thinking patterns triggered by trauma. I have done that. I am now a certified coach for CBT, because it really does. Like I had to really sit back and and ask myself, like, before I try to respond, I try to catch my mouth. Sometimes it just flies out, but I really have to sit back and be like, okay, am I responding from facts or from feelings? It's as simple as that. Um, so it kind of just helps you. In one of the ways you practice is just kind of like identifying your automatic negative thoughts. So somebody says something and it's automatically like, oh, they're saying this. Oh, they're saying that. Oh, they're looking at me. Oh, and so many of us do that. So grounding technique. Um, I grounding is really, really important. I often do this when I'm speaking to kind of hijack that amygdala and that trauma response because a lot of times I'm talking about the trauma that I went through as a child. Yesterday, I talked about the strangulation, the near fatal strangulation event that I went through. I mean, it was specifically talking about his hands being around my throat and feeling like I was going to die. How many times he hit me in the head? How many times my head hit the floor? You know, talking about, him having the shotgun to my head. Like all of those things I was talking about in detail to a conference via the web out in Vegas. I had to really work on grounding. So one of the things that I do is like I'll a lot of times take my middle fingers and my fingernails and I'll go back and forth hitting them in my thumbs for kind of like a painful response. Sometimes if I'm watching a video, I'll like be kind of pinching the back of my arms, like just going back and forth, kind of keeping that in the here and now. Um, just doing things to sometimes you'll I have a little pebble in each one of my shoes if I'm standing and speaking, and I'll just press down, trying to kind of keep the right brain and the left brain intact and being able to really work on my breath work while I'm speaking, taking pauses, and then being able to kind of, just to kind of really take a breath in and think for a moment and then continue my speaking. So I'm very intentional about those things. Physical exercise. I am one who I hate getting on a treadmill. I hate doing exercise, but you can change it up and make it fun. Gardening has been my way. I go outside, like taking, digging in the dirt, getting down and, squatting and pulling weeds and standing up, like doing those things is productive for my garden. I'm outside, my feet are on the ground for grounding. And so I encompass a lot of those things. People doing EMDR, um, that can help. I have done it. It did not work for me. I think that part of that was the brain injury. I didn't have, I was very sensitive to light. I was very sensitive to sound. There was just a lot of stuff. I tried it before I actually had worked with neuroplasticity and kind of working on my brain and seeing my functional medicine doctor. So I will say that in everything, not all therapies work for all people, but EMDR, which is the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, it kind of just helps you reprocess traumatic memories. And that's just a real short, but it's something that you can look into. So social connection and support, like having people, like I was asked yesterday at this conference, did I have support? So part of my kind of my brain injury, because I do have a anoxic and traumatic brain injury. It is with that prefrontal cortex is my emotional regulation. So yesterday I was so excited. I was talking like Bill Smock, who is absolutely phenomenal, was talking, sharing my story, and they were talking about strangulation. This is like a strangulation conference. And so like I was so excited and empowered to be speaking, and inward, I felt so motivated and excited about this opportunity that I was given. Yet, like while I'm talking, tears just start running down my eyes. My outward expression did not align with what I was feeling internally. And that is really, really hard. And being able to have friends and family that understand that, like having supportive relationships, because that helps reduce stress and it helps give me safe spaces for my dysregulated emotions. So that is really important because that kind of goes back to a previous podcast where you have oxytocin. So, you have your happy hormones, your feel good chemicals. Having that support, those social connections and support helps also regulate that oxytocin. So having all of these things in play really does work. And sleep and nutrition. Sleep, like I have 5 dogs. They're my like emotional support. But they haven't been sleeping the last couple nights. I don't know what they're passing around, but I am not getting the sleep that I need. Like I'm one of those people that I go to bed by 8, I am up by 4 a.m. like clockwork. I usually sleep right through while they've been getting me up, a few times a night. And so I do not have the sleep, the adequate sleep that I normally have. Well, I can feel that because that makes me more sensitive to all of this. So I'm quicker to respond from emotions instead of, rational thinking. And so being able to also have, um, good nutrition, it is so important for brain health and gut health and really total wellness, to be able to have a good diet. I do not eat processed food. I am gluten-free and dairy-free. Like I am very specific with my diet, and it is because of this regulation and kind of rewiring from trauma. It does play a huge part in the foundation of trauma recovery. So there's that. Um, so really, when you kind of step back and you look at the big picture, the rational brain, so the prefrontal cortex, helps regulate emotions, plans, and makes in making thoughtful decisions, while the emotional brain reacts to stress and fear. So trauma disrupts that balance, which makes you kind of come from a place of feelings instead of facts. So more from your emotions instead of being rational. And so you really do need to kind of step back and think about your prior and previous experiences and what trauma you have to ask yourself, am I doing these things? Are my daily responses coming from a place of, you know, rational thinking, or do I respond a lot of times out of emotions? Um, and so I challenge you to deep dive in that and kind of really think about it. And I'm doing kind of this first series on my podcast of just kind of the very, very basics of these systems, how trauma kind of impacts them, and kind of putting some of my experiences so that people just kind of figure out what that looks like for people. And then I'm going to really deep dive into more of this stuff as we go along in this podcast, bringing on some, doctors and stuff like that, because we really do need to understand this trauma stuff. Because I mean, you just can't look at the world today and think that people are rationally thinking. And I mean, it's just crazy. It is absolutely crazy. So I challenge you to kind of look at yourself, and the next time you feel that little pressure in your chest and you feel like you're just going to kind of respond, ask yourself quickly, am I responding out of facts or feelings? And maybe you'll start to see patterns. It's really interesting once you kind of are aware of that and you start responding that way. Thank you very much for joining me in this courageous journey of kind of just looking and hoping to inspire hope in people and really just embracing change and hoping to give people courage to say, hey, this is me and I want a different life. I want to not be ruled by trauma, not be ruled by my past, because total wellness is amazing. It feels good, and it feels good to for the first time in my life, be in control of my body, my emotions, my you know financial wellness, my emotional wellness, my spiritual wellness. Just to feel at 50 the best that I've ever felt in my life, and unpacking trauma has given me that freedom. So be blessed, have a wonderful day, and take care.